Now, over the past few weeks, we've reported on the use of antibiotics in modern cattle production for both prevention and treatment of disease. We've looked at how the products are used on the ranch and in the feedlot, at their role in quality animal care, and at the government's role in approving and monitoring these compounds. But as many cattle producers know, there are currently legislative efforts that would sharply limit or even prohibit the use of antibiotics in animal agriculture. We wrap up our series of reports with a look at the current legislative environment of antibiotics used in the livestock industry. Dave Russell reports.
For decades, cattle producers have been using a variety of tools like antibiotics to prevent and treat disease in their herds. Now, on Capitol Hill, legislation has been introduced that would sharply limit the use of these tools within all of animal agriculture.
My biggest concern is legislation that circumvents the regulatory process. We have a regulatory process that's served us well for many years and has evaluated these drugs for safety. The regulatory process is there to address all these issues, but when we have groups that are trying to circumvent that system and proceed on a legislative agenda, then I'm very concerned that we're not relying as much on science as we are on emotion and politics.
In Congress, a bill called PAMTA, the Preservation for Antibiotic Medical Treatment Act, has been introduced by New York Democratic Congresswoman Louise Slaughter, who chairs the House Rules Committee and is a microbiologist. Last year, her committee held a hearing on the bill where Leonard Boswell, a Democratic congressman from Iowa, testified.
Louise Slaughter holding hearings in the Rules Committee about animal antibiotics, that's unprecedented. I would argue she has zero jurisdiction. And someone made the point that even though she has pointed out that she is a microbiologist, that she last studied microbiology when Harry Truman was president.
I think Ms. Slaughter, from wherever her perspective is, she's coming with a concern. You know, and you can tell about her background. But we heard that she was going to have this hearing, which was kind of unorthodox. We don't have the Rules Committee. I've known of them having hearings on something of this nature. And Alexis on my staff, I've heard about it, and so we talked about it. So we thought, well, we better participate if we can. So we made the effort and did. I guess we were the only dissenting individual there on that program that day. But so we got quite a discussion, and that's kind of started what's going on here today.
Congressman Boswell is a cattleman himself, and he's concerned about the impact the PAMTA bill would have on the U.S. livestock industry.
This would cause us in the animal production industry to, some of the usages we have with different antibiotics, to have to go back and reprove they're okay, which has been through already an extensive program, very extensive with FDA. A lot of time and a lot of investment, and for a good reason, because we want to have safe food. I don't want to eat unsafe food. I don't want my family or my grandchildren or anybody else's. And that's my perspective. That I think that's the perspective of all the producers. We wouldn't want that. So we've been pleased we've gone through this, and there's a number of products there that this could possibly take away.
This legislation, as I understand it, essentially bans the use of non-therapeutic antibiotics. And they're described as growth hormones. Well, we know that the gains come from diminishing the amount of diseases that animals get. So it's a preventative for diseases. And we've done it for a long time like that. There is no evidence that antibiotics are building up in people, which causes a resistance to human antibiotics, but there is a religion, a suspicion that that's the case. And it grew in Europe.
In Europe, Denmark banned the use of antibiotics in agriculture more than a decade ago, which mostly affected pork producers there. Members of the House Agriculture Committee traveled to Denmark last September to get a first-hand look at the results.
So we went over and talked to their science community, their education community, went out and talked to some farmers. And I don't know we came back with anything very conclusive, but I think I can say this. From reading between the lines and hearing their answers, that actually their death loss went up. They drove a lot of farmers out of business. They went from like 20-some thousand farmers down to like, what, 5,000, something like that. The days to weaning and so on is longer, and they created more expense.
And the result of it is they lost some producers when they first passed the legislation, and those that were able to adapt watched as they had more of the pigs prior to weaning, especially, that they lost, or during a weaning period when there's high stress period of time. And today it takes the Danes about 4.5 more days to get a hog to market than it does us in the United States. I think those kind of numbers would extrapolate over to the beef industry, and I believe also what happened in Denmark and has happened in many places in Europe is the people who have this suspicion or religion that the use of antibiotics in animals translates into resistance to the antibiotics in humans. These people have pushed this politically in Europe, and in doing so, I think the Danish livestock producers, along with many European producers, pushed back, lost the political debate. Now the path of least resistance for them now is to push on America and say, well, you adopt our policy, therefore the Danes and other Europeans could compete better with the United States because they would take away some of the tools that we have that make us more competitive.
We think in the final analysis, what they ended up doing is greatly disrupting their industry at very little benefit. They may have shown some reduction in resistant bacteria in animals and some food products, but they really did not prove that they benefited human health. And to this day, there's no solid evidence that human health has, in fact, been improved because of this ban. So we think it was a very costly move on their part, and not sure what they really accomplished. They try to say that, well, we accomplished the goal of reducing antibiotic use, and they may have done that overall, but certainly after the ban took place, the therapeutic antibiotic use went way up because they were having to treat diseases they weren't treating before. So it's very debatable whether the Denmark experiment, if you will, and the European experiment has really done much other than disrupt animal agriculture, maybe led to increased food costs, and not really helped human health.
Those pushing the PAMTA bill say the use of antibiotics in animal agriculture develops resistant bacteria in humans and reduces the effectiveness of human antibiotics. But with FDA and USDA approving, regulating, and monitoring these products, the science shows antibiotic resistance is a complex issue where both risks and benefits need to be considered. And the impact of losing antibiotics in animal agriculture would be devastating to animal health, welfare, and food security.
Certainly, disease is going to go up. Certainly, producers are going to suffer, and it's likely it's going to have an impact on food costs as well. So we don't support PAMTA. We think that the FDA ought to be allowed to do what they do best, and that is to look at a scientific process. They have been reviewing these products for a long time. They have yet to find a significant public health problem with them. This would tend to force that issue. We don't think it's necessary to force that issue because FDA has been doing the job for a while, and if they find there's a problem, I'm sure our companies will work with them to try to determine that there is a problem. But PAMTA is very overreaching, we think.
Now, this don't make much sense, to force something that doesn't need to happen. Do we have a good protective? Do we have a good check and balance? We do. And so I think we'll need to recognize that. So we're going to watch it very closely, and I don't think that there's any other committee that would have any more interest or more concern than the Agriculture Committee. And so if this starts moving along, we'll certainly ask for it to be referred to the Ag Committee for action. And I can't imagine when I will do all I can to the leadership, say, you know, this has a major impact on food production. And this world population increasing by over 90 million a year, this is not the time for us to do silly things. It's not necessary.
Well, I represent the #1 pork producing district in America, and we have a lot of beef cattle also in the district and stock cows as well. There isn't anybody in the ag industry that thinks it's a good idea to let the inner city of America tell us what we can do, and there isn't any sound science for them to base that on. So all of these arguments get made. If you want to argue on sound science, we win. Livestock producers win. They can use non-therapeutic antibiotics without any real scientific evidence of a problem. If you want to argue the economics, that argument is also strong. We need to get our livestock to market, and the more quickly and safely and effectively we can do that, the better we can compete in the larger market share of the overall protein market we're going to have. So I think the future of the livestock industry, the future of American competitiveness, all hangs out there in the balance, and it's under assault.
The bottom line message is that we think the bill is founded on the premise that production agriculture is a problem. And I think the message to our producers out there is, you know, we produce the safest and most wholesome food in the world, and this could seriously undermine that. And we think that to take good technologies, safe technologies, out of the producer's hands that have not been proven to be a safety hazard to public health is really ill-advised. And we would suggest that producers, you know, try to fight this at all costs, because it simply is not appropriate to take an action that's not based on risk just because there's a perception that there's a problem. It's not the way we do things in the United States. It may be the way they've done things in Europe, but we still try to stand behind the scientific process.
Those who know Capitol Hill say this is a battle that will continue, and NCBA and its membership will have to weigh in and stay engaged on Capitol Hill to preserve the opportunity to have the animal health care tools America's livestock producers need. I'm Dave Russell, reporting for NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen.
Now, the PAMTA legislation and the issue of antibiotic use in animal agriculture is something we will continue to follow here on NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen.